The sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson as William Blackwood strolled down the bustling streets of New York. At 45, he had everything money could buy: a sprawling mansion overlooking Central Park, a collection of luxury cars, and investments worth billions. But behind his perfect smile and tailored suit, there was an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. William had lost his father when he was just 7 years old. James Blackwood had been deployed overseas, and one fateful day, his family received the devastating news that he was missing in action. For nearly 4 decades, William had lived with unanswered questions, with a void that seemed impossible to fill. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming content like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced an unexpected connection that changed your life? Now let's continue with William's incredible journey. That crisp autumn morning started like any other. William had a meeting with potential investors at a cafe downtown. As he walked past a small neighborhood park, something caught his eye. A young boy, no older than 10, sitting alone on a bench. The child's clothes were worn and tattered, his shoes barely holding together. But what struck William wasn't the boy's obvious poverty. It was what dangled from his neck. Even from a distance, the military dog tags caught the sunlight, creating a familiar glint that made William's heart skip a beat. He couldn't explain the sudden pull he felt, the inexplicable need to approach this stranger. William had seen countless dog tags in his lifetime. His father's service had inspired him to donate millions to veterans' causes over the years, but something about this moment felt different, like the universe was holding its breath. William checked his watch. He had an hour before his meeting. Slowly, he approached the bench where the boy sat, his hands fidgeting with the metal tags. "Those are nice dog tags you have there," William said softly, trying not to startle the child. The boy looked up, his eyes wary but curious. "My dad gave them to me," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "He said they belonged to a hero." William nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. The boy shrugged and moved over slightly. William sat down, trying to appear casual, while his heart hammered against his ribs. He wasn't sure why he felt so drawn to this child, why his pulse raced with anticipation. Perhaps it was the melancholy in the boy's eyes, a reflection of his own childhood grief. "My name is William," he offered, extending his hand. The boy hesitated before shaking it. "I'm Alex," he replied. William noticed a small tear in Alex's jacket, the way his frame seemed too thin for his age. "Those dog tags," William said, trying to keep his voice steady. "They must be very special to you." Alex nodded, his small fingers wrapping protectively around the metal. "My dad found them when he was working in an old building," he explained. "He gave them to me last year, before he—" The boy's voice trailed off, his eyes clouding with pain. William recognized that look all too well, the fresh wound of loss that time had yet to heal. "Before he passed away," Alex finally finished. William felt a pang in his chest, a surge of empathy for this child who knew the same grief that had shaped his own life. William's curiosity was overwhelming now. "Would you mind if I took a closer look at those tags?" he asked gently. Alex hesitated, then slowly lifted the chain over his head. "Just be careful with them," he said. "They're the only thing I have from my dad now." William nodded, taking the tags with reverent hands. As he turned them over, his fingers began to tremble. The name stamped into the metal made his vision blur with sudden tears. "Blackwood, James A." William couldn't breathe. The world around him seemed to fade away. The children playing nearby, the traffic noise, even the bench beneath him. All he could see were the dog tags that had once hung around his father's neck, the very ones that should have been returned with his body had it ever been found. How had they ended up here, in this park, around the neck of this boy? "Are you okay, mister?" Alex's voice cut through William's shock. William blinked rapidly, trying to compose himself. "Yes, I'm fine," he managed, though his voice cracked with emotion. "It's just, these tags belong to my father." Alex's eyes widened. "Your father?" "But my dad found them in an old building he was working in. He was a construction worker." William's mind raced, trying to make sense of this impossible coincidence. What were the odds that his father's dog tags would find their way back to him, after all these years? And through this boy, of all people? William looked more closely at Alex now, taking in details he'd missed before. There was something familiar in the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw, something that stirred a distant memory. "Alex, would you tell me more about your family?" William asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the thundering of his heart. Alex shrugged, his eyes downcast. "It's just me and my grandma now. My mom left when I was a baby. My dad took care of me until last year, when he got sick." The boy's matter-of-fact tone broke William's heart, too young to have experienced so much loss. "What was your dad's name?" William asked, barely breathing as he waited for the answer. "Michael," Alex replied. "Michael Rodriguez. But everyone called him Mike." The name meant nothing to William, and he felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. He had allowed himself to imagine wild possibilities, connections that couldn't possibly exist. And yet, the dog tags were real. His father's dog tags, somehow found by this boy's father. "Did your dad ever mention anything else about where he found these?" William asked, gently running his thumb over the engraved name. Alex's brow furrowed, in concentration. "He said it was in an old building near the harbor. They were tearing it down to build new apartments." William's pulse quickened. His father had been reported missing overseas, but what if that wasn't the truth? What if James Blackwood had somehow made it back to American soil? The questions multiplied in William's mind, decades of acceptance suddenly unraveling into new possibilities. "He also said there was a box," Alex continued, his voice brightening with the memory. "A small metal box that had the tags and some old letters inside. My grandma has it at our apartment." William checked his watch again. His meeting was in 15 minutes, but suddenly it seemed utterly unimportant. "Alex, would you take me to see your grandmother?" he asked, barely able to contain the urgency in his voice. "I'd like to ask her about that box." Alex studied William's face, his young eyes surprisingly perceptive. "You really think these belong to your dad?" he asked. William nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "My father went missing in action almost 40 years ago. His body was never found. These dog tags should have been with him." Alex's eyes widened with understanding. "That's why you got all weird when you saw them." William smiled despite himself. "Yes, that's why I got all weird. These tags are the first trace of my father I've seen since I was 7 years old." Alex seemed to consider this for a moment. "My grandma doesn't like strangers," he said finally, "but she's always saying I need to help people when I can." He stood up, brushing off his worn jeans. "She works until 6, but I can take you to our apartment." William rose as well, pulling out his phone. "Let me just cancel my meeting," he said, already dialing his assistant. As he quickly explained the situation, leaving out the more impossible details, William watched Alex waiting patiently, his father's dog tags now back around his neck. Whatever happened next, William knew his life had irrevocably changed the moment he spotted those metal tags catching the sunlight. For the first time in decades, he felt a connection to his father that went beyond memories and old photographs. They walked 6 blocks to a rundown apartment building, Alex leading the way with the confidence of familiarity. William noted the peeling paint, the security door with a broken lock, the narrow stairwell lit by flickering bulbs. It was a far cry from his penthouse with its marble floors and panoramic views, Yet there was something about the building that tugged at William's memory. Had he been here before? They climbed to the 4th floor, Alex chattering about school and his friends, while William's mind raced with possibilities. What would the box reveal? Could it possibly explain what had happened to his father? After so many years of acceptance, William found himself unprepared for the sudden resurrection of hope, for the way it made his heart race and his palms sweat. "This is us," Alex announced, stopping at apartment 4C. He reached under a worn welcome mat and retrieved a key. "Grandma says I shouldn't let strangers in," he admitted. "But you're not really a stranger anymore, right? You're the son of the man whose tags I've been wearing." The simple logic of childhood. William nodded, suddenly nervous as Alex unlocked the door. The apartment was small but meticulously clean, with furniture that had seen better days but was well cared for. Family photos lined the walls. Alex as a baby, as a toddler, holding a fishing rod beside a man with a kind smile. William assumed this was Michael, the construction worker who had somehow found James Blackwood's dog tags. "The box is in Grandma's room," Alex said, leading William down a short hallway. Alex rummaged through his grandmother's closet, eventually pulling out a shoebox labeled Mike's Things. Inside was a small, rusted metal container, dented on one corner. "This is it," Alex said, handling it with reverence. "Dad said I could have the tags, but Grandma wanted to keep the box safe." William took the container with trembling hands. It was a standard military-issue storage box, the kind soldiers used for personal items. His heart pounding, William carefully opened the lid. Inside, along with a few yellowed photographs, was a stack of letters bound with twine. He recognized his mother's handwriting immediately on the top envelope. These were letters from home, sent to his father during deployment. Letters that should have been with him when he disappeared. "Can I?" William asked, gesturing to the letters. Alex nodded, watching curiously as William untied the twine. The letters were arranged in chronological order, the last one dated just 2 weeks before James Blackwood was reported missing. With shaking fingers, William unfolded it, his mother's familiar handwriting bringing a fresh wave of emotion. The letter was filled with everyday details. William's progress in school, their neighbor's new baby, plans for when James returned home. Normal life, frozen in time. But it was what William found tucked inside the final envelope that made his breath catch. A small, handwritten note on unfamiliar paper. "If found, please contact Elena Rodriguez at..." The address listed was this: Very Building, apartment 4C. William stared at the note, unable to process what he was seeing. "Alex," he said slowly, "what was your grandmother's name before she married?" Alex shrugged. "Elena, I think. Why?" The room seemed to spin around William. Elena Rodriguez. The same name on the note, the same apartment. This couldn't be coincidence. "How old is your grandmother?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "She's 67, Alex replied. "She had my dad when she was really young." William did the quick math in his head. If Elena was 67 now, she would have been in her late 20s when James Blackwood disappeared. The right age to have been involved with a deployed soldier, perhaps as a pen pal or through a support program for troops. "When will your grandmother be home?" William asked, carefully replacing the letters in the box. He needed answers, explanations that only Elena could provide. Why did she have his father's personal effects? What did she know about his disappearance? "Around 6, Alex replied, glancing at a clock on the wall. "That's in like 2 hours." William nodded, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "Would it be okay if I waited?" Alex considered this, then nodded. "You can help me with my math homework if you want. I'm really bad at fractions." William smiled despite the tumult of emotions. "I'd be happy to help with fractions." As they moved to the small kitchen table, William carefully brought the metal box with him, unwilling to let it out of his sight. After decades of emptiness, these tangible connections to his father were too precious to leave behind. The next 2 hours passed in a strange blur of normalcy and surrealism. William helped Alex with his homework, ordered pizza delivery for them both, and listened to the boys' stories about school and friends. All while his mind raced with questions and his eyes repeatedly drifted to the metal box on the counter. What would Elena's reaction be when she saw him? Would she recognize the name Blackwood? Would she have answers about his father? Or was this all some bizarre coincidence? At precisely 5:58 p.m., keys jingled in the lock. William's heart leapt to his throat as he rose from the kitchen chair. The door opened and a woman entered, petite, with silver-streaked dark hair and tired eyes that widened in shock when they landed on William standing in her kitchen. "Who are you?" she demanded, her hand still on the doorknob, ready to flee. "Grandma, this is William," Alex piped up, seemingly oblivious to the tension suddenly filling the apartment. "His dad owned the dog tags that Dad gave me." Elena Rodriguez froze, the color draining from her face. She stared at William, her eyes moving over his features as if searching for something. "Blackwood," she whispered finally. "You're James Blackwood's son." It wasn't a question. William nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Elena slowly closed the door behind her, her hand trembling visibly. "I always wondered if you would come," she said softly. "I just didn't think it would be like this, after all these years." She moved to the kitchen table, her legs seemingly unsteady. "Alex, why don't you go watch TV in your room for a bit? Mr. Blackwood and I need to talk." Once Alex had reluctantly disappeared into his bedroom, Elena turned to William, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "You found the box," she said, nodding toward the metal container on the counter. William nodded. "What I don't understand is why you have it," he said, struggling to keep his voice even. "My father was reported missing in action overseas. His body was never recovered. So how did his personal effects end up here with you?" Elena took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly together on the table. "Because he gave them to me," she said simply. William stared at her, the implications of her words slowly sinking in. "That's impossible," he said. "My father disappeared in 1983. He was declared dead." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "He didn't die in 1983, she said quietly. "At least, not right away." William sank back into his chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "What are you saying?" he demanded, his voice harsh with shock and disbelief. Elena looked down at her clasped hands. "Your father was captured, William. He escaped 3 years later, but he was changed, traumatized. The military debriefed him, but he couldn't go back to his old life." William shook his head violently. "That's not possible. My mother would have been told. We would have known." Elena met his gaze steadily. "He asked them not to tell you. He believed it would be kinder to let you think he had died a hero than to see what he had become." "I don't believe you," William said, though the conviction in her eyes made his certainty waver. "Why would he come to you? Who were you to him?" Elena sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I was a nurse at the VA hospital where they treated him after his return. We became close." She looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks despite her age. When he was discharged, he had nowhere to go. He couldn't face his old life, his family. The things he had experienced, they broke something in him. He came to stay with me temporarily. That temporary arrangement lasted 5 years. William felt as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. 5 years. His father had been alive for 5 years after his supposed death, living just miles away from his family. "Why didn't he ever contact us?" William asked, his voice breaking. My mother mourned him every day until she died. I grew up without a father." Elena's eyes filled with compassion. He wanted to, William, many times. But the man who came back wasn't the man who left. He had severe PTSD, nightmares that would make him scream for hours. Some days he couldn't even remember his own name, let alone be the husband and father you both remembered. She reached across the table, hesitantly, touching William's hand. He kept every letter, every photo. He would talk about you, how smart you were, how proud he was of you. But he was convinced you were better off without the broken version of him that returned. William pulled his hand away, anger rising through his shock. That wasn't his decision to make, he said sharply. We deserved to know he was alive. We deserved the chance to help him. Elena nodded, accepting his anger without defense. You're right, she said simply. I told him the same thing many times. But trauma doesn't make people rational, William. He truly believed he was protecting you. William glanced toward the hallway where Alex had disappeared. A terrible suspicion was forming in his mind. Elena, he said slowly. Michael Rodriguez. Was he? Elena followed his gaze, understanding dawning in her eyes. Yes, she said softly. Michael was your father's son. My son. Which makes Alex my brother's son, William finished, the words sounding strange on his tongue. My nephew. Elena nodded, tears now flowing freely down her lined face. James and I never married, but we were together until his death in 1990, a heart attack. Brought on by years of stress and the medications he took for his condition, she reached for a photo album on a nearby shelf, opening it to reveal a picture of a man holding an infant. The man was older, gaunt, with a beard that couldn't quite hide the familiar features of James Blackwood. This is the only picture I have of your father with Michael as a baby. William took the album with trembling hands, staring at the father he had thought lost forever. There was pain etched into James Blackwood's face, but there was also a glimmer of something like peace as he held his infant son. All these years, William whispered. All these years, I had a brother I never knew about, and now a nephew. He looked up at Elena, decades of grief and new shock battling within him. Why didn't you try to find me after my father died? After your son found the dog tags? Elena looked ashamed. James made me promise never to contact you or your mother. He was adamant about it. When Michael found the box during a demolition job, pure coincidence, the building used to be a VA storage facility, I recognized it immediately. I told him about James, but I kept my promise not to reach out to you. She gestured helplessly. And then Michael got sick last year. Cancer. By the time he passed, finding you seemed, I don't know, too late somehow. William sat in silence, trying to process everything he'd learned. His father had not died a hero's death overseas, but had lived for years just miles away, too broken to return to his family. He had started a new family, had another son who had grown up, lived and died without William ever knowing he existed. And now there was Alex, an innocent boy who had unknowingly brought his grandfather's dog tags full circle. Alex doesn't know any of this, does he? William asked finally. Elena shook her head. Michael only knew that James was a veteran who had suffered trauma. I never told him the full story about James having another family. It seemed kinder somehow. Another terrible decision on my part. Grandma. Alex's voice came from the hallway. Can I come out now? Elena quickly wiped her tears. Yes, sweetheart, come join us. Alex padded back to the kitchen, looking between his grandmother and William with curious eyes. Did you guys talk about the dog tags? William and Elena exchanged a look, a lifetime of secrets hanging in the balance. We did, William said carefully. And it turns out, your grandmother and I have a lot to catch up on. He turned to Elena. I'd like to get to know Alex better, if that's okay with you both. Perhaps you could come to dinner at my place this weekend. Elena looked startled, then cautiously hopeful. You're not angry? She asked quietly, while Alex looked between them in confusion. I'm processing a lot of emotions right now, William admitted. But anger isn't the predominant one. He looked at Alex, seeing hints of his father, of their father, in the boy's features. Life is too short for anger. My father lost years with his family because he couldn't move past his trauma. I don't want to make the same mistake. He turned to Alex, who was watching the exchange with growing curiosity. Those dog tags brought us together for a reason, Alex. I think your grandfather would want us to make the most of that chance. Alex's eyes widened. My grandfather? But I never met him. He died before I was born. William smiled gently. That's a story for another day. But I knew him a long time ago, and I'd be happy to tell you about him sometime. As William left the apartment that evening, exchanging phone numbers with Elena and promising to call the next day, he felt a strange sense of peace mingling with his shock and grief. The father he had idolized all these years had been a flawed, broken man who had made painful choices. The perfect hero of his childhood memories had never really existed. Yet somehow, learning the complicated truth felt like finally saying goodbye properly. Outside, the New York night was cool and clear, stars barely visible through the city lights. William looked up, wondering if his father had ever stood in this same spot, looking at these same stars, thinking of the son he had left behind. I forgive you, Dad, he whispered to the night sky. And I'll look after Alex now, I promise. The weekend dinner became a monthly tradition. William discovered that Alex had his father's aptitude for mathematics and his grandfather's love of baseball. Over time, the awkwardness between William and Elena faded, replaced by a cautious friendship built on their shared connection to James Blackwood. William hired tutors for Alex, paid for his grandmother's medical expenses when her arthritis worsened, and eventually offered them a comfortable apartment in a building he owned. Not out of obligation, but because they had become the family he never knew he had. The dog tags now hung in a frame in William's study, alongside photographs old and new, his father in uniform, Michael Rodriguez at his high school graduation, Alex hitting his first home run with William cheering from the stands. On what would have been James Blackwood's 80th birthday, William took Alex to visit his grandfather's grave. They had never been before. The cemetery was in a quiet corner of Queens, far from the family plot where an empty casket had been buried decades earlier under a hero's headstone. This grave was simpler, marked only James A. Blackwood, 1945-1990, at peace. As Alex placed flowers by the stone, William thought about the strange path that had led them here. How different his life might have been if his father had found the strength to come home. How easily he might never have known about Alex at all, if not for a chance encounter in a park, a glint of metal catching the sunlight. Do you think he's watching us? Alex asked, looking up at the clear blue sky. I'd like to think so, William replied, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. In the 3 years since they'd found each other, Alex had grown several inches taller, his voice beginning to change, his face losing its childish roundness. Soon he would be a teenager, then a young man. William was grateful for the chance to witness that transformation, to be part of Alex's life in a way James never could be for either of his sons. Your grandfather made some mistakes, William said carefully. We all do, but I think he'd be proud to see us here together. Alex nodded thoughtfully, his hand reaching up to touch the spot on his chest where the dog tags had once rested. I'm glad I wore them that day, he said simply. I'm glad you saw them. William smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. So am I, Alex. So am I.